Alright, CNT140, we're looking at Chapter 4 now. Our focus now is on structured cabling. So, the standard install of structured cabling for a building. That's going to be our main focus on this one. Alright, so standards for network cabling. The origin, the standards promise interoperability and expandability. Exactly. The original standards were developed by a variety of groups working together. In many cases, it was many manufacturers. If you think back in time, when we first started doing networking, you had IBM developing their own protocols, their own cabling, their own jacks, all that stuff for their own networks. You had Xerox doing the same thing. You had Apple doing the same thing. So eventually, as these manufacturers and these companies started coming together, going, "Hey, I'd like your equipment to work on my network," and vice versa, they had to start coming up with a way to do that, and that's where the standards started coming from. Initially, it was, Ethernet kind of has become the standard for networks. Well, as things started, everybody was doing their own thing, and eventually, Ethernet kind of worked well. It was kind of cheap, and most people wanted to start adopting that. So it was kind of this de facto, well, if you're going to use our network, then you need to use our network cards, and you need to use our cabling, and blah, blah, blah. Well, then from that eventually came the standards that we know today, and that we're following today. They've reminded us that ANSI coordinates the standards for the U.S. The TIA is kind of the whole, they focus on data and voice cabling, and with that, the TIA 568 standard comes from that, which we use as the basis for putting in our network and phone cabling to service many different types of things. A basic cable structure that will support many different things. And they list these in the books for you, the main standards that have come out of that working group are these: the 568, 569, 570, 606, 607. Start recognizing these. Start recognizing what they are, at least on a basic level of you would know where to look if you're trying to find something. If you're trying to find how things should be done in a home, you're going to be looking at the 570 standard to know this is the guideline to try to do it for your house. If you're looking at how I need to set up my wiring closet, I'm looking at the 569. And so forth. So at least start recognizing what these are so you know where to look. So for now, just for kind of familiarity, but do realize that, and I think I show this on the next page, this that we have talked about before, the standards guide that we talked about before, has in pretty much all these standards plus some more. It does not have the residential, it does not have the home in, but it has all the commercial structured cabling, closets, labeling, those sorts of things. It has those things on for us, as well as the IEEEs. So real quickly, on our Chapter 3-4 page, in here where I have links, this link allows you to pull up the standards guide right here, and you see there's all the standards that are in it, including IEEE 802.3, AF for Power over Ethernet, 802.11 for wireless. It has a lot of these in as kind of a go-to reference for a lot of things that you would encounter in networking. So we're going to be referring to that a lot. I have it linked there for you. Okay, they also remind us that the international standard equivalent to this is the ISO, and they give you the number here. I'm not going to be too hung up on that one because our focus is really our class in the U.S. and everything, but just realize there is an international standard, and there's the number for it. Revisions to these standards are made, sometimes a couple times a year, and what they typically do is after a few years and there's enough revisions that have come along, they'll come up with a whole new set of standards. Or I should say a whole new revision of the standard. That's why there's been 568A, 568B, 568C, and so forth. So as enough things have changed, they come up with a whole new revision saying, hey, here's the new updated version. And again, the idea is if you're following these standards, you should be meeting all these other things that come along. I should be doing things well enough that I'm meeting all the electrical code standards, the local fire codes, that sort of thing. And again, they're not mandatory. It's not mandatory that I follow the 568 standard, but when I do, I more than likely are going to have things work. I'm going to be able to connect different pieces of equipment to it, Dell, Apple, IBM, and have them work. And I should also be meeting my national electrical code as well as some local code, fire code kind of things. again, it's kind of the bulk of things are going to be correct for you. Standards for the designer installer are written for and by the manufacturers, okay? And they talk about how standards describe how things should look, what components to use, how they should be tested, etc. And I put a reminder in here that the standards describe how things should look. If I look at the 568 C0 and C1, it tells me the structure of my system, what components to be used. Again, C0 and C1 tell me what components I should be using, and how things should be tested. If I look at 568 C2, that tells me how my copper infrastructure needs to be tested and certified, if you will. So yeah, the standards are going to tell us all these pieces. Alright, so looking at our 568, building the cabling according to 568, this defines a flexible cabling scheme that's designed to support voice, data, and even sometimes video, allowing for moves, changes, upgrades. Equipment is placed in a special room, and backbone is going to connect those rooms. Yeah, and all this should actually kind of sound and look familiar from what we talked about in 120, but they give you in the book here, they give you kind of a cheesy picture. So okay, we're going to add to that. Let's go a little bit bigger. I dug this picture up, and I think I even have it saved out on D2L for you. This gives you an idea of what, what kind of a building looks like with all the cabling, the raceways, and going down walls and into rooms and that sort of thing. This is the kind of thing that's really going on in real life. Well, I threw that in as just kind of get you an idea that there's a lot of pieces to this, but let's go a little bit more basic. Let's kind of boil down to a couple of the basic things that we're going to have to worry about. So in a building, what you're typically going to find is, okay, let's start at the bottom down here. The outside wiring coming from your ISP is going to come into kind of the main connection point in your building, the main closet in your building. In there, it's going to connect into routers and firewalls, okay? And you'll have an equipment rack here with routers and firewalls in, and including some switches and so forth. You're then going to take and probably run some backbone cabling, this red cabling here, probably fiber optic, going from the switch in here to the switch up here, going from the switch here to the switch up here, and connect your closets together with some backbone or fiber optic cabling. And we're either going to go through the floor, we're going to drill holes in the floor and put little sleeves in here that we can run the cabling between these closets. Okay, so I'm going to have some backbone cabling connecting my equipment closets together. And then in each equipment closet, I'm going to run, I don't need to use fiber now, I can use copper. Copper's a lot cheaper, less expensive, a little bit easier to terminate, blah, blah, blah. We'll run copper cabling from our closet here, from the patch panel, we talked about that already, from the patch panel out to outlets on the wall for the users to plug into, the user computers to plug into. And I'll repeat that for each floor. That way everything on this floor is coming to this closet, organized, it's predictable, you know where things go, and then I interconnect my closets with the fiber optic. So I have now the cabling going between my closets is my backbone wiring. Sometimes you hear them call it vertical cabling. The cabling coming from my closet here out to the users is horizontal cabling, because more times than not it's going this way, horizontal across the floor. That's your copper cabling. And these closets, the main one in the building that has in most likely the servers and the firewalls and the routers and that sort of thing, is my main cross connect. And then my smaller closets on each floor that has, for the most part, probably a switch and a patch panel or two, are just going to be the telecommunications closets, or the TRs or TCs, telecommunications room or telecommunications closet. Okay? That is my basic structure. I redrew it on this for you to show you this is roughly what it's going to look like. Here's the switch, and then I'll have a cable going from there up to a patch panel, and then the patch panel is going to be horizontal cabling out across the floor and down to an outlet on the wall, and then a patch cable out to the user here. And you'll notice I have some details of each of these pieces. Those details have become more important as time goes on. Just recognize there's some details there for you. If I have a multi-floor building, you're going to see that this gets repeated. So I kind of redrew this right here in this manner for you. Here's my rack of equipment, outside connection coming into a router. I have a switch here, backbone up to a switch over here. From my switch up to my patch panels, horizontal cabling out, and so forth. So that's kind of what it looks like with just a few more details than what we showed here. Okay, and again, I have those details showing you distances and so forth. They'll become important as time goes on. One of the next things they talk about in here, if they talk about the basic structure, actually, before I leave that, make sure you do know the structure. Make sure you do know the closets. Make sure you do know, the backbone cabling, the horizontal cabling, telecommunications closet, main cross connect, that sort of thing. Make sure you know those pieces. Okay. Next thing they mention is the types of cabling, or the permitted distances, I should say. The permitted distances for our different types of media. Okay, this is a good breakdown. They give you a good breakdown here. That's good. That's good enough for now. But I'm going to give you a couple more details. First is, if I go look at my standard, one of the first things they say is, hey, the recognized media that I can use in my building for horizontal cabling is blah, blah, and blah. 100 ohm balanced twisted pair cable in category 3, 5E, 6, or 6A, multi-mode fiber, and they tell you what types, and single mode fiber. I'm allowed to use those as cabling in my building. And then they go on to say, hey, here's the cabling distances. And I like this chart. This is a little bit more broken out than what the book gives you. It says, okay, here's the distances as I look at my balanced twisted pair, maximum 100 meters no matter how I slice it. But then they go on to tell you here what categories for what usage. Again, we'll come back to that in a few minutes too, but just recognize it shows you the cabling distances for these. On another page, and I purposely made this small, I don't want you to see all the details of this now. They actually have a separate page that shows you the maximum distances for different types of fiber. The book gave you real briefly multi-mode and single mode. This breaks it out further based on the wavelength of light you're using and the type of fiber you're using. So this gives you a little bit more breakout. And again, as we do fiber later this year, we'll look at this in more detail. That's why I left it small for now. But realize that the standard tells you the distances based on type of fiber and everything else, which is really handy. They say most horizontal connections use UTP. Absolutely. That's why our drawing showed that. And they also start talking about the origins, the category of these cables. Okay, when I come back in the next podcast, we'll start digging into the different categories of twisted pair cabling.